To be or to be? That is the question. Wait. Line? I'm gonna get fired. ¿Ser o estar? Esa es la pregunta. Bienvenidos todos y para mis suscriptores, bienvenidos de vuelta. Soy Profe Austin, pero ustedes me pueden llamar Austin o Austin Teaches Spanish. Hoy investigamos las similitudes y diferencias entre los verbos ser y estar y cuando elegimos uno o el otro. Although in English we only have one verb to say how something or someone is, in Spanish we've got two, and mixing them up can make for some pretty embarrassing moments. And I'll have some examples for you guys later in the video. So today, we're gonna break down these two verbs to make sure we never mix them up again. Now, before we talk about the specific differences between these verbs, let's discuss what they generally mean in the broad sense. The verb ser is used to describe what something is, and is used to talk about things which are more permanent, like characteristics, while estar is used to talk about how something is, and discusses things which are generally more temporary, like situations. Now, there's a couple of acronyms which are often used to teach when we choose one or the other. The acronym for ser is doctor, which stands for description, occupation, characteristic, time, origin, and relationship. The acronym for estar is place, which stands for position, location, action, condition, and emotion. Now, these acronyms are by no means perfect, and they each have a good number of exceptions, but I'll provide specific detail on each one as we go through to have better clarity. What I do recommend as we go through, instead of trying to memorize all of these letters in the acronyms, is just to make sure you remember that guiding principle between the two, with ser always talking about what something is in general, and estar always talking about how something is in a given situation, and focus more on how the letters in the acronyms fit those principles and why the exceptions have to take place. So let's start with our doctor acronym for ser. Firstly, when we want to provide descriptions on what things are in general, we'll use ser. Now, this could be things like names, ages, physical aspects like size, shape, or color, religions, and nationalities. Many of these descriptions are completely permanent and cannot change, but some of them can change in different situations, which will lead us to use estar. To give you an example, if I tell you to think of a banana right now, what color do you picture it being in your mind? Yellow, of course, porque las bananas son amarillas. However, if I tell you to picture a rotten banana, what color is that? It's black. So we could say something like, esta banana está negra. Creo que está podrida. See the difference between those two? How about another example? Let's say I had a brother named Jim, who's a big guy with a really big belly, and he always has been. I could describe him saying, mi hermano Jim es gordo. Now let's say I haven't seen Jim for a while, and he shows up at Thanksgiving one year, and suddenly his big belly is just gone. I could say, Jim, ¿qué pasó? Estás flaco. So in both of these examples, ser is used to describe what things are in general, whereas estar is used to describe when some situation has changed those descriptions. Next up in the acronym, we've got O for occupations. Now we use ser to talk about what we do for work. So if I were a teacher, I'd say, soy maestro. Notice I didn't say un maestro, to say a teacher. The only time we use un or una is if we're adding extra context. So if I say, I'm a teacher who always arrives early, that's going to be, soy un maestro que siempre llega temprano. Now, there is going to be one scenario when we'll use estar to talk about occupation, and that's for temporary jobs. So if I, as a teacher, take a summer job at Wendy McCastleberger cooking orders, I could say, soy maestro, pero durante el verano estoy de cocinero, to say, I'm a teacher, but during the summer, I'm working as a cook. And using estar de tells us that it's a temporary position. Next in the acronym is C for characteristics. Now, this is honestly what I think the whole acronym really boils down to. I see everything else in the acronym as just being a more specific type of characteristic. Now, just like with our descriptions, there are going to be cases when we use estar for describing situations that go against something's usual characteristic. For example, if someone is normally very strong, you'll say es fuerte, because that's their normal state of being. But if they're having an off day when they're feeling weaker than usual, that's now a situation, which is going to call for estar. So we'd say está débil hoy. And the T for time is used to talk about any point in time, whether it's time on the clock, the days of the week, the date on the calendar, seasons, events, or whatever else. So if we want to ask someone what time it is, we say ¿qué hora es? Or we can say ¿qué horas son? But we're still using ser. Or we can say hoy es lunes, el 26 de mayo, to say today is Monday, May 26th. Next up, we have O for origin, which is used to talk about where people or things are from or what things are made of. So if I say, I'm from the United States, that's soy de los Estados Unidos. Or if I want to ask somebody where they're from, I can ask, ¿de dónde eres? Or, ¿de dónde es usted? In more formal context. And when we talk about what things are made from, we use ser, but if we're talking about how things are made of a certain material, we'll use estar. But in either case, we're going to use the word de just before we say what that material is. So for example, if we want to say, the window is made of glass, that gives us either la ventana es de cristal or la ventana está hecha de cristal. The difference between the two is the estar hecho de usage implies more of a focus on the actual process of being made from whatever material, whereas ser de is just to give a description on what something is. And our last letter for ser is R for a relationship. Now, this can be used to talk about relationships between people, animals, objects, places, or really any kind of noun. So to give you a few examples, if I say, ella es mi prima, that means she is my cousin. Or, esta es mi gata, to say, this is my cat. Or, este es mi micrófono, to say, this is my microphone. Now, even though that relationship can change over time, like if I sell my microphone and it's no longer mine, that doesn't mean we switch to estar, but instead we just use ser in the past tense, like ese fue mi micrófono, to say that was my microphone. Okay, so that rounds out our acronym for ser, so let's move into our other to-be verb, estar, and talk about the place acronym. First off, we've got P for position, which is used to talk about how someone or something is physically situated in space. So to say, I'm lying down, I'm sitting, and I'm standing, respectively, that gives us estoy acostado, estoy sentado, and estoy parado. Now, none of these positions I take have anything to do with who I am as a person. They only describe my situation. Next, the L stands for location and is used to talk about where something is. No matter how long something has been in a certain place, or whether its location can even change at all, we use estar instead of ser. So when I say Florida is in the United States, that translates to Florida está en los Estados Unidos. Now, the only time we'll use ser to describe location is when we're talking about events, because the location of the event is an intrinsic characteristic to what the event is. So if I want to say the party will be at my house, that gives us la fiesta será en mi casa. For anything else besides events, we're describing where it is with location, not what it is as a characteristic. Now, there are two other verbs that we can use when talking about location, quedar and haber. Firstly, quedar is used to describe locations for more fixed points, which aren't going to change, and can in this context be translated as be situated in. So for example, I ask, where is the nearest bank? That's going to translate as ¿Dónde queda el banco más cercano? Now, quedar and estar are very similar to each other in this context, in that they describe the locations of things that are already established to exist. But when we're establishing whether or not something even exists in the first place, that's when we're going to use the verb haber. So going back to our example with the bank, if we want to ask somebody, Is there a bank nearby? That's going to give us hay un banco cerca. Now, in the present tense, haber is always going to be conjugated as I to say there is or there are, whether we're talking about singular or plural things. So, for example, if we want to let our roommate know that there are beers in the fridge, that's hay cervezas en la nevera. If, however, our roommate decides to drink all of them and we want to ask them where they are, we say, ¿Dónde están las cervezas? Again, we're using haber to establish the existence of something at the same time as describing its location, while quedar and estar are used only to establish the location of something we already know exists. Okay, so moving on, the A in our acronym stands for action, which is used to talk about any ongoing action with the progressive aspect, which you can learn all about in my video on the progressive aspect using that link up top. Anytime we use the progressive aspect to talk about the ongoing nature of a specific action, estar is going to be used, and we never use ser here. Keep in mind that estar isn't the only verb we can use with the progressive aspect to describe our ongoing actions, and I explain how we can use 3 really common ones in that video. Now, there is one exception to this when we can use ser to describe actions, and that's going to be using the perfect aspect. And I've got the link for that video up top if you want more detail. In these cases, ser is used to describe the characteristic of a completed action which had some effect on a person or thing. All right, now the C for condition is used to talk about things that are going on with us which are subject to change at some point. These could be things like health issues, like when I say estoy enfermo, which means I'm sick. It can also be used to apply to mental and physical states as well, like when we say estoy cansado to mean I'm tired. And of course, this can also apply to the physical condition of objects as well, like el vaso está roto to say the glass is broken, or la estufa está caliente to say the stove is hot. Now, it does get a bit more complicated than that, but I'm going to cover that a little bit later in the video before our practice round. Let's go ahead and move on for now. Now, the final letter in our acronym is E for emotion, which is used to talk about our feelings at a given point in time. So, for example, we could say, Estaba feliz hasta que perdí mi cartera. Ya estoy preocupado, which translates to, I was happy until I lost my wallet. Now I'm worried. This one also gets a bit more complicated, so let's shelve that for now, and we'll move on and we'll talk about what happens when we use ser instead of estar and vice versa. Now, there are going to be times when our choice of which to-be verb can convey different meanings. For example, if I say estoy aburrido, that means I'm bored. But if I say soy aburrido, that translates to I'm boring or I'm a boring person, because that word aburrido is being used to describe what I am in general rather than how I am in the moment. As another example, if we want to talk about whether we're single or married, we usually use estar. So to say I'm single, that's estoy soltero, or I'm married, that's estoy casado. But let's say, for example, I'm married and I go out to a bar with some buddies and somebody starts to try to flirt with me. I can tell them, lo siento, soy casado. In this case, the choice of ser gives the situation of being married a greater emphasis. Like being married is a core part of what makes me who I am. Sure, I could say estoy casado to say I'm married, but the use of ser gives a translation which is more along the lines of I'm a married man. Now, there are all sorts of words in Spanish which will have completely different meanings depending on whether we use them with ser or estar. Now, one of the best examples I can give you is the word for good, which is bueno. So if I want to say that somebody is a good person, I could say, él es bueno, which just means he is good. However, if I switch it to say, él está bueno, I'm saying he's hot or he's attractive. Another good one is the word listo, which is generally used with estar to say ready, but if we use it with ser, it means clever. Now, I'll go ahead and throw up on the screen a list of common words and how they translate with ser versus estar, and you can pause here if you want to review them. Okay, moving on. Another way ser and estar can be used for different things is with food or drink. When we use the verb ser to describe how a certain food tastes, we're talking about how it is in general, or a certain characteristic that can always be attributed to that food. But when we're using it with estar, we're talking about how it tastes in a certain instance, like describing something that we're currently eating. So if I say, la limonada es dulce, I'm saying lemonade is sweet, talking about lemonade in general. But if my friend gives me a glass of lemonade he just made, and let's say he accidentally used salt instead of sugar, I can ask him, ¿Qué demonios hiciste? Esta limonada está muy salada. And that means, what the hell did you do? This lemonade is too salty. So here I'm talking about that specific glass of lemonade that I'm drinking. So I'm using estar. Now, before we get into our practice section, I've got two big things I need to discuss with you to give context to those last two letters in our place acronym. And those are the verbs hacer and tener. The verb hacer, which usually means to do or to make, is often used as our to be verb when we're talking about the weather. So for example, in English, we say it's hot, but in Spanish, we'll say hace calor instead of está caliente. Or if we want to say it's 70 degrees, that'll give us hace 70 grados. So in Spanish, literally, if we try to translate that, we're saying it makes 70 degrees, but that's how we say it is 70 degrees. And the last thing before our practice section is the verb tener. Now, tener, which translates as to have, is used in all sorts of expressions in Spanish, where we would use the verb to be in English. Firstly, when we're discussing our age in terms of how old we are, we use tener because in Spanish, years of age are something that you accumulate over time, not something that describes who you are as a person. Now, of course, if we want to discuss our age without using years, we're still going to use ser. So, for example, soy adulto y tengo 29 años means I'm an adult and I'm 29 years old. We also use tener to describe certain emotional or physical sensations which affect us, but which are usually caused by external forces. Some examples are hunger, thirst, heat, cold, fear, and pain. Now, I'll go ahead and throw up some of the most common examples of tener as to be up on the screen now, and you can pause here if you want to review. Okay, so that's all we've got now. So let's go ahead and get started with our practice round. I'm going to give you guys a few example sentences in English, then translate them into Spanish with our target verbs left out. You're going to have two jobs here. You'll need to decide on which verb is the correct one to use, whether it's ser or estar or a different verb, and you'll have to decide on the correct conjugation. If you can't get the conjugation right, you'll get partial credit for at least picking the correct verb in the infinitive. Now, you're going to have 5 seconds to decide on your answers before we move on to the next question. Like always, these practice sections are open book, so feel free to pause and jump around the video as much as you need before deciding on your answer. ¿Estamos listos? Pues claro que sí, porque somos listos. Empecemos. Our first example is, have you heard? Jenny's grandpa is dead. Our translation is, ¿has oído? El abuelo de Jenny, muerto. 5 seconds. You think you know it? ¿Has oído? El abuelo de Jenny está muerto. That's right, we're using estar here, even though being dead is, well, it's pretty dang permanent. The state of being alive or dead doesn't tell us anything about who Jenny's grandpa is or was. Rather, that's something that's going on with him at the current point in time. Now, our next example is, don't argue with him. He's a kid. He's only 9 years old. Our translation is, no discutas con él. Un niño. Solo 9 años. 5 seconds. Good luck. No discutas con él. Es un niño. Solo tiene 9 años. We're using the verb ser to describe the characteristic of being a child, but we use tener to talk about how many years of age he's actually acquired. Ready for another? Our next example is, I'm hot. really sunny today. Our translation is, calor. Mucho sol hoy. 5 seconds, think you know it. Tengo calor. Hace mucho sol hoy. In this case, we're not going to use ser or estar, since we're talking about the weather and the physical sensation that it has on us. So we use hacer to describe the weather and tener to describe the physical sensation that it makes us feel. Okay, let's do a couple more. Our next example is, my flight was canceled, so I'm buying another one. Our translation is, mi vuelo, cancelado, así que, comprando otro. You've got this. Mi vuelo fue cancelado, así que estoy comprando otro. Here we're using ser to describe a completed action with the perfect aspect, and estar is being used to describe an ongoing action with the progressive aspect. Now, if you're unsure how to use those two groups of tenses, definitely make sure you check out my conjugation series with the link up top. All right, we ready for one last one? Our final example is, you're from Puerto Rico? My brother is there right now. Our translation is, tú, de Puerto Rico, mi hermano, allá, ahora mismo. All right, you're up. ¿Tú eres de Puerto Rico? Mi hermano está allá ahora mismo. All right, guys, so how'd you do? Did you get all the answers right? If so, fantástico. Eres muy listo. If you missed any, that's okay. This can be a pretty tricky subject. But try to remember going forward. Ser is used to talk about what things are using characteristics, and estar is used to say how things are in different situations. Just keep practicing, and you'll have these two verbs mastered in no time. All right, well, it sounds like that's all the time I have for you guys today. But before we go, I want to let you know about how you can participate in a free group lesson with me and 9 other learners. The first 10 people who scan this QR code or use the link down in the description will be enrolled in a 1-hour private group lesson completely for free. Just scan the code or click the link for details, and I'll see you then. Now let me know down in the comments if you have any questions about today's lesson or suggestions for future videos. I reply to all comments, so I encourage all of you to practice what you learned here today, and I'll let you know how you did. And finally, if you've enjoyed today's video, don't forget, make sure you leave a like and make sure that you're subscribed so that you're up to date on all my new content. Gracias por ver. Que tengas un lindo día. Ciao.